So I want to ask each of you just a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to the whole group. I mean, Ariadne, we'll start with you. I love this book. It is
thanks,
such a love letter to this city in just the most unambiguous of ways. And what I think I really appreciate about it is the fact that it occupies multiple genres at once. The noirish component, though, comes across most visibly in this book is obsessed with night, right? I mean, it really is sort of lurking and thinking and inhabiting night in really important ways. People disappear into the night. The ghosts come out in the night. The tour guides have to do they have to perform at night. All of the best work of the plot is done at night, which is, of course, a classic trope for noir. Do you do your best work at night, Ariadne?
I give my best tours at night. I certainly don't like giving ghost tours in the daytime. That's weird as hell. I am a daytime writer, for sure. It's actually weird for me. A, it's weird for me being in the upper quarter because my tours are all in the lower quarter. B, it's really weird for me being in the quarter during the day. I don't like it. You can see too much. Nobody needs to see this much of the French Quarter. But yeah, I think like literal darkness is certainly an element that is, I think, very common in a lot of noir writing. I also think that the best writers can turn daytime noir as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Even the twilight hour is pregnant with potential in so many different ways. Tell us a little bit about how Ash Tuesday got started.
Well, after a couple years giving ghost tours, I started to realize that this is a pretty fertile subject. In my own life and in my own work, I love kind of connecting different ideas. And I think that the typical attitude of people toward ghosts and ghost stories and ghost tours in the French Quarter is that it's like kind of cheesy. You know, a lot of people who live in the quarter are very annoyed by the ghost tours. I've had people like throw stuff at me. I've had cars swerve toward me. I've had people heckle me and yell at me and, yell about how I'm lying and all that. But I think what I really came to in my first couple years as a tour guide and what really kind of informed my writing of this book is that these ghost stories and this folklore in the French Quarter, I think, is really indicative of our character as a city. I think you can learn a lot about a place culturally through its ghost stories. And I get kind of existential in the tour. I think that ghost stories are a really important way as a culture that we process loss and grief. I think that ghost stories are really about our need for connection and our hope that we can continue connecting with the ones we love after they're gone. And so I think they're very, valuable for that reason. And I think another really important thing about New Orleans, and this is relevant to anyone who writes about New Orleans in kind of a dark way, is that we are a city that was born out of tragedy and that will end in tragedy. When you look at our origins, we were literally colonized by abduction. The King of France realized there weren't enough people here to create a self-sustaining colony, and nobody wanted to come here because everyone who came here just died immediately. And so he emptied the prisons of Paris. He sent people involuntarily. He rounded up like homeless people on the streets and sent them here against their will. And of course, that's not to mention the thousands of people who were sent here enslaved who built this city, right? So we have very dark origins here, and we're going to have a very dark ending because the reality is we're a city below sea level in a world where bad storms are now coming every 5 years instead of every 20 years. I end my tour this way, and it's pretty dark, but I tell people the city's not going to be here forever. Eventually, the city itself will become a ghost. There's no way around that. So I think there's darkness kind of bookending the existence of this city. There's a lot of darkness in the last 300 years, and I think all that means it's a pretty great place to write about dark shit.
Yes, the waters will swallow us, and we will become a ghost, but I have to give credit to, here in our audience, we have the novelist Maura Crone, whose book, The Not Yet, envisions the future New Orleans as an archipelago, which is also kind of interesting. So we may go through a transitional state before we arrive at full specterhood. I do want to ask you, Ariadne, your narrator is
Don't give it away. Don't
I
give it
will
away.
not give a thing away. I will simply say that
There's a
you're
twist.
a narrator. All the more reason to buy the book. You have to find out what's going on with the narrator. But in noir, one of the things that we really kind of think about carefully is subjectivity and who can we trust, and is the point of view in a storytelling, or is the storyteller's point of view reliable? Do we care if it's reliable? How do we navigate what it means for a character to be a cipher, a watcher, or an observer, as opposed to an agented individual? Can you just tell us a little bit about how you developed the point of view of your narrator, also without giving anything away?
Well, that's hard to do. I will say the twist came to me while I was napping. And it woke me up out of my nap, and I had one of those like cheesy moments where I like leapt out of bed and like went to write it down. But yeah, the narrator is an unreliable narrator, to be sure, and I love the conceit of an unreliable narrator, because I think that really invites the reader to think critically. It invites the reader to participate in the story and to not become complacent in their reading. And so it's always been fun for me hearing from readers at what point in the story they figure out the twist, because some people figure it out really quick and some people don't figure it out until the end. And I love that the reader kind of participates in the unfolding of the story, because there is that kind of slight murkiness.
I will say there are clues, but that's all I will say. Last question for you before we move to Bill. One thing I think that Ash Tuesday handles particularly well, and this is a very New Orleans kind of theme, is your book is very careful to mark and to celebrate and to dwell in liminal spaces. Mm-hmm. So you're really interested in doorways, thresholds, mirrors play an important theme in your book. There's a sense, and this is just noirish in general, in which sometimes we are between worlds. We are neither fully in one nor in the other. And I was just wondering if you could kind of comment on what the idea or the power of the liminal space for you has been in writing this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of the physical liminal space in the book parallels something that's very important in noir, which is kind of moral ambiguity. You know, in noir, the lines are blurred, right? There's a lot of liminality. Usually the characters are kind of flawed. They're neither good nor evil. And I think as a genre, you know, noir is kind of unafraid to be cynical and shed light on hard truths. But I think that the best noir actually contains an element, or at least a hint, of redemption or hope, right? It's kind of cliche, but there's no light without dark, right? There's no dark without light. And so I think that the best writing really embodies both of those things. The light and the dark, the good and the bad, just all the kind of complexities of being human, and kind of using that contrast to get to kind of the complexity of the human condition. And I think that, you know, that can be achieved through character, through plot, but certainly through setting as well, through liminal space. That's a great way of putting it. I like work that plays with both. I am not interested at all in any kind of art that's totally nihilistic or cynical. I think that's really boring. And I think the best work, even really dark work, I think should kind of do both at once.
Thank you so much. Bill, so I want to ask you, in your passage from the new Maureen book, I mean, there was a noir element there, which I can't believe I left out of my introduction. I feel like I made a great mistake. Smoke, right? Smoke is one of these great kind of tropes that we get in classic noir, and I love how truly hard-boiled your fiction is. It is the best kind. You have been writing for a long time. You came to prominence with an early Amazon Discovery Award for your novel Fresh Kills. You've published stories in a noir anthology. And over the last decade and a bit, you have been focused on the Maureen Coughlin series, writing from her perspective. We're now at 5 plus 1, which makes 6. Tell us about this series, and tell us about sort of meeting and writing Maureen.
Oh, man. So Maureen was a character that I carried around for a long time. She had kind of different incarnations and she was a side character, and the novel that became my thesis for graduate school. And so my first 3 books were all set on Staten Island, where I grew up. And I'd written a bunch of short stories about it, and I had this cast of characters. and she was one of them. And so most of the characters ended up getting a novel. And so the first Maureen book, The Devil She Knows, was her novel, in which she's a cocktail waitress in a Staten Island bar. She ends up on the wrong side of a crooked politician who used to be a cop, and he decides she needs to go, and she decides she's not gonna. And that's basically the story. It's actually, I realized several years after I wrote it that I just stole the plot of The Terminator. So, and I mean, Sarah Connor starts off as a waitress and with this big mean dude after her. So, so from there, so this was supposed to be a standalone, and it was going to kind of finish what I call the Forgotten Borough trilogy, the 3 books about Staten Island. And towards the end of the book, she's hiding out of her mother's house, and they're under police protection, and there's a police car sitting in the street, and she's sitting in the living room window in the middle of the night looking out at the police car, and she starts thinking about, I could do that. And she starts listing the reasons why she feels she would make a good cop. And I was like, you know what? You actually would be good at that. And so that's how it became a series. And so I wanted to keep writing about her, and I wanted to write about New Orleans. So I just moved her here. And so she goes to the police academy here in New Orleans, and she joins the police force here. And so the first book set here, The Devil in Her Way, she's fresh out of the academy, running the streets with her training officer. And it just kind of took off from there. And I decided on a patrol officer character instead of a detective, because when I thought about it, everywhere you go, you see somebody in that blue uniform. Right? Every serious crime, every social event, every festival. So I can move her all over the city into all these different milieus without having to make a lot of wild excuses for how she ended up there. And so, and what ended up happening is all the Maureen books are in one way or another about power. And so writing about someone who has been ignored, neglected, and abused for most of her life, who comes into power. How does somebody handle that or not handle that? So a big part of the previous books before this one is she kind of teeters on the edge of becoming a bad cop. Because finally she can make some people pay when she's just had to take some shit, for most of her life. And so what became a big part of the character is that her walking that line, and she meets good cops and she meets bad cops, and she's got to really make some decisions about what kind of cop and then what kind of person really that she wants to be.
Let me ask you. You've actually anticipated one of my questions. I want to back up just a second though, and come back to this idea of the moving her down from New York City and Staten Island down to New Orleans. When often we think of the kind of the hard-boiled detective, sort of detectives in fiction, they are so often attached to a place, right? So Inspector Rebus, right, Edinburgh, Scotland, or Inspector Morse, right, fundamentally associated with Oxford, England. There are just so many which kind of place and person go hand in hand. What was the process of relocating your character like for you, for her, for the research process, and so forth?
Well, it gave me 2 things. It gave me a way to write about New Orleans where it was credible to explain a lot, because she's an outsider and she's learning. So she's got to learn. So it was an easy way to kind of translate New Orleans for the reader. And she needed to start over. And I think noir is very place specific. I think one of the things noir does well is it drills down deeply into a place. And ultimately what I had to decide to do is I was stuck for a long time when I moved here. I'm like, where do I start it? Is she in the academy? Is she 5 years down the road? I couldn't decide what to write about. And I was talking to my wife about it. And she says, quit trying to write the book about New Orleans. Write a book about New Orleans. And that I was like, okay, I'll talk about a couple things in this book, and then the next book we'll talk about a couple other things. And it became a way to really drill down into New Orleans, like Dennis Lehane does in Boston, like Laura Lippman does in Baltimore, like Pelicanos does in D.C. And I think one of the reasons noir can be so place-based is because I think there's always a socioeconomic element. The people you meet in a noir novel are not, they're not riding in wrecks, unless they're the villains, it's the people who are cleaning up after the parade are the people who are in a noir novel.
Yeah, one of the things that Joel says in his book on the origins of cool is that noir, it's always focused on the underdog. There was always sort of a sense in which the protagonist or the main character is fighting against something which is larger than themselves and often losing.
Well, to me, noir is the literary equivalent of the blues, right? Everybody thinks, the blues, they're so sad, they're so depressing, they're about death and breakups and being broke and having nothing. And I'm like, well, if you're singing about it, that means you survived, right? So to me, the blues are about survival and endurance and starting over. So I think noir can be about those things too.
Last question for you before we move to PM, and amen to that. The literary equivalent of blues, love it. You mentioned cops, and you mentioned sort of cops are rarely clean in noir. Touch of Evil or New Orleans, right? We had a consent decree. Raise your hand if you remember the consent decree. Yeah,
no shortage of material.
None, not an every day. How do you write Maureen handling a city where you never know who to trust?
She never knows who to trust, and she makes mistakes. She trusts the wrong people, and she suffers the consequences. And I think, as is common to noir, your protagonist makes the wrong choices, and other people suffer the consequences.
Novelists will tell you the only thing that's interesting is trouble.
The anomaly.
PM. So I have to say, I have to just geek out a little bit here because I'm feeling very, very amazed. PM is the first person I've ever met in person, I just got to brag on you for a hot second, who has been published in the Paris Review of mystery magazines. Ellery Queen. I've never met an Ellery Queen author before. I know it. Oh my goodness. So I'm feeling pretty amazed right now. You've been writing for many years and writing in this genre and related genres for many years. Your bookshelf is very well represented here. Now, unlike the novels that we have present, your new book is a collection of stories. So tell us a little bit about how the collection came to be and where the noir elements that link the individual stories emerged.
Mm-hmm. So I am primarily a short story writer. That's my comfort zone. I'm trying to break out and write a novel, basically an exploration of one of the short stories. But the stories came about when I moved to North Carolina. I didn't know anyone, and if anyone has ever moved at later stage of life, it's really hard to meet people. So I ended up joining one of the Sisters in Crime meetings, the local chapter, which now, after 6 or 7 years living there, I'm now the president of that chapter and one of the few people of color in that chapter. And when I went to their first meeting, I felt very welcomed. And that's when I started really thinking about crime writing. But they wrote a lot of cozies, which is very not me. But I also kind of realized I need to write what I want to write. So I just started writing little stories, and they didn't have a critique group, so I said I'll start one. So I started a critique group with the chapter. And my very first story that ever was sold was for the chapter anthology called Rock, Roll, and Ruin. And I wrote a story about a young IT developer for a gaming company who stole the music from a friend of his, passed off as his own, and became very famous from it, and his friend was not having it. And so there was a chainsaw involved in that story. And when I wrote that story, and I know the person who said it meant well, but she's kind of made an offhanded comment that really struck me. And she's like, this anthology is really important for our chapter because for some people, it's the only time they'll ever be published. And I thought, oh my God, this could be the only time I'm ever published. I'm like, I can't, that cannot be. So I really buckled down, but that really stuck with me that it is really hard to get published. And I think I for some reason thought it was easy because it was a chapter anthology, but then I just really stuck into the craft. And when I did that, I took immersive courses, and one of those courses was, I can't remember quite the name of it, but it was an immersive horror writing course. And so each week you would have to write about some kind of trope, whether it's a haunted object or reviewing a section of a horror film and writing an analysis of it. And from that experience, half of my collection are stories that I started during that time. And then I started incorporating crime elements into them as well. And so now what I write is more speculative noir or speculative fiction. And I'm really, really proud to say that the book that's about to come out, I was able to get an amazing early praise from S.A. Cosby, who's one of our leading authors in the noir space. And he said that P.M. Raymond is a bright new star in the speculative world. And I'm like, what is speculative again? Like, what does that mean? So I had to look it up. I'm like, what is he? But I'm just really, that's kind of really where it started. Is I just kept writing stories and just kind of developing the craft along the way.
I tell you, Ellery Queen and S.A. Cosby, we're not worthy. We are just absolutely not worthy. No, there's a device that you use in this new book, which is classic noir, and I love it. Every time it gets implemented, it is just so satisfying, not for the ones it happens to, but for us as readers, and that is the double cross, right? I mean, you use deception and trickery and lies, and you kind of weave these in, and until I'm going to mix all my metaphors here. Suddenly someone pulls the rug out from underneath somebody else and they never saw it coming. And it's just so noir to do that. Is that a favorite device of yours, or did the stories just lead you there naturally?
Yeah, now that you mention, I guess I do that quite often. I call them a twist. Like in crime and mystery, but like, is there a twist at the end of the story? And especially in short stories, you need to give people I feel like a real bang for the buck, especially if you're only gonna give them 5,000 words or maybe 10,000 words. At the end, that's one of the kind of the hallmarks of crime writing, I find, is having some type of twist. My twist does happen to be a double cross or a supernatural occurrence that has been planted. And when you look back, you're like, yeah, okay, I see where that came from. Like, it's usually not unearned.
And that is exactly the next question I wanted to ask you, which is about the genre fusion that this book occupies. And it's really hard to do. I mean, think about all of the sort of like, Thai/Ethiopian restaurants, the sort of fusion thing that exists. And you can't name very many. Hard to pull off, but when you do, it is magic. And I was just curious, what does the genre fusion look like for you in the process, and how does noir in your mind overlap with horror, right? Existential horror, kind of like a character not being able to get out of a situation that they're in, kind of horror. Where do those lines overlap?
Yeah. So the collection and really my writing in general, I'm writing specifically from my point of view, from a black woman from the South, and that itself lends itself to horror. just existing, my existence just seems to bother people. Just simply me breathing. And I write that into those stories, and I think that's where that noir comes from. We talk about complicated characters in a noir setting, and about people who are flawed and sometimes deeply troubled. When you have an existence where you are made to have to justify who you are, and on some levels, growing up even in New Orleans, there's a whole different. New Orleans and Atlanta have a shared complication with colorism, I find. So just kind of growing up in that environment where either you're not black enough, or you're too black, and having that being used against me. So from a noir setting and from a horror setting, a lot of my stories will focus on race and gender and the transgressive line between those two, and how that fault line will develop in a story.
Having read several stories in this new book, I can tell you that what happens to King Booker as a result of multiple transgressions is particularly chilling, and even just sort of thinking about it now, I was reminded very much of that surprisingly good film from about 20 years ago, Skeleton Key. Again, not spoiling, promise I won't spoil, but the sense in which transgression has consequences in this genre is very real in your work.
Mm. Yeah, actually, I did an analysis of the Skeleton Key. I do like that movie. It definitely fits its time period of the mid-90s. But the analysis I did was based on how it represents African spiritualism. It does not do it very accurately. It's an entertaining film, but if you don't get to see a lot of that on film, you may think that is real, and it's not. African spiritual practices are neither good nor evil. They just exist, and depending on, what it is you're, looking at, it doesn't play out that way. So I compared it to Eve's Bayou, which is a film also set in the 1960s in Louisiana, as well as to Daughters of the Dusk, which is a film set in South Carolina during the 1920s, and then to a contemporary film called His House, which is about immigrants coming to the UK, and something that they did is revealed in the third act as to how they got to the UK, and it's very traumatizing, and it's an excellent film. I'm sorry, I think I just got off track.
No, you're
oh,
good.
the Skeleton Key. So yes, the Skeleton Key. African spiritualism, which also shows up in this book, I try to take more care with it and show that it's not a party trick, that it is an actual religious practice. And I did a lot of research to hopefully get it right. I know I'm not going to ever get it 100% right, but at least get it to a point where it feels authentic.
The twists there are just perfect for the genre. They absolutely make those stories sing, so thank you. Tom, your book has just come out, and can you just give us the nutshell synopsis so that folks can understand what on earth your poor character has gotten himself into, and it's way over his head.
It's about a guy who's moved here from the Bay Area, and he has this sort of background where he wanted to sort of become like a PI, and he didn't. He kind of chickened out of doing it, and then but he's engaged to be married into this sort of wealthy uptown family, and he's kind of in over his head already, honestly, with that. And then his fiance's college days brother disappears, and her uncle offers him a bunch of money to find the kid, and he kind of knows maybe this is not a great idea. Maybe there's more going on here, and his fiance is like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do this. She doesn't want him to do it, but then he does it anyway because he has both a lot to prove to himself, or to them, and to himself.
Now, Tom does something really interesting in Wait There Till You Hear From Me, which is, and he's very explicit about this as a project. He has said in writing that he wants to write about portions of New Orleans and places in New Orleans that do not normally get considered for the kind of noirish treatment, right? I mean, we can think of the stereotypical locations, but Tom is here taking his characters. We know about mosques on the West Bank and where you throw the bodies in the swamp, after the hit is over. But Tom is taking us to Metairie for noir, right? Metairie noir is a new genre in certain instances.
Coming soon from Akashic Books.
You heard it
Kenner
here first.
Noir. Is there anybody here I can pitch that to?
I want to ask you about that, though, because we've been talking a lot about the role of a city to define a character and their choices and their circumstances and so forth. So what was it like for you to try to branch out into parts of the city that don't normally get written about?
I mean, I don't know if it was like, I think New Orleans is a hard place to write. I'm going to tell a little story. I don't think I'm going to get in trouble. I have to look around. Okay. I taught right before, I moved to Albuquerque like 2 years ago, and right before I left, I taught this workshop on setting, and there, John Aber, you were in this workshop. There were like a dozen people in the workshop. There were 2 people from New Orleans. We read a story by like a canonical, one of the great living New Orleans writers who's like so deeply a part of this city, and everybody loved it except the 2 people from New Orleans. They were like, they put it down and they're like, he's not from here, is he? And I was like, what? You know? So yeah, he's very from here. I think everybody
Now
has
we got to know who it is, right?
I know. I just think that like I think I started looking for places where I was afraid of writing too much. And I mean, I think that's what's so beautiful about like Ariadne's book is like I've read about the Quarter, but I haven't read about like ghost tours. So it's like it was trying to find something that like whether it was a physical location and a lot of it was just kind of intuitive and trying to find places. And I think I also was fascinated. I lived here twice. I lived here when I was younger, and I left for about 10 years, and I came back. And I was always, I don't know, I was just like fascinated by like I love Gentilly. Like I love driving around Gentilly and like the kind of the California. I think people used to call it like Little California. Like there's like so many fascinating parts of this city that were off the map of what I sort of first thought was like New Orleans. And so it was just kind of a way, I think it was just kind of what I was interested in. But yeah, then it became like kind of like, you know, we put the GNO, the Crescent City Connection on the cover in part because like I wouldn't say the majority of the book takes place in the West Bank, but a couple of the most important scenes take place in the West Bank.
We think California, we think Chinatown, of course, great classic noir film. That architecture, you know, just speaks to us. I want to ask you about the theme of underworlds, right? I mean, in your fiction, you're particularly interested in moving into sort of spaces or even communities of people that don't normally get seen. And one of the things that Charles Prentice encounters is that there's kind of a whole group of individuals who he can't even really identify exactly who they are, who are at work to conceal this person from him. And so what is it like as you're structuring your plot to create ambiguities, right, both for the character and for the reader, so that we are left in doubt, in suspense, like Sam Spade as he's hunting for wherever the Maltese Falcon has gone?
Man, that's a really good question, Ben. Could I have like 20 minutes to think about that and get back to you? I got to go write something.
We'll all go get a drink at the bar.
Yeah,
We'll come back, right?
I'll sound better if you all have another one. I think that, you know, I think that is like a very New Orleans thing. I think there's like a little bit of like I think the sort of the corruption sometimes goes so deep here in this sort of interesting, sometimes like slightly absurd, funny way. But I think that's the thing about the genre, like everything from like great like noir films from like Chinatown to like The Big Lebowski is like, I have trouble, I'm like, if you press me and I sit down, I could tell you, oh, here's who is ultimately the bad guy, and you sort of like, you see Cross at the end of Chinatown. But there's a sense, I think it's something I like about this genre because I think it reflects something that is often true to me about the world, is that there's these sort of like depths of like corruption that are really difficult to fathom. And that's something that I just something I think is like valuable about the genre, that it like grapples with in a way that has a lot of truth to me. So that was, I think, where that kind of comes from.
Calls to mind, for the poets in the room, it calls to mind, of course, John Keats's theory of negative capability, which is the state of being in doubt or uncertainty without, and this is the key phrase, without any irritable reaching after fact or reason, right? That is the noir sensibility. I am curious, is this a series, Tom? Is there another Charles Prentice novel in the works?
I have at least, I want to do like two, I think there's more, I want to find out more about these characters, yeah. And when we put it, it says a Charles Prentice novel across the top because the editor at Crescent City Books, she's like, are you working on another one? I was like, I'm thinking about it. He's like, I'm going to put that on the book because it'll like make you, like it'll light a fire under you, actually make you do it. You know, I read a lot of different stuff. I have like I have a lot of stories, and I have another novel I want to go back to that I finished a draft of that's not a Charles Prentice novel when I go home. But I have ideas for two. I at least want to do two, like round out, like I guess like a trilogy, 2 books about sort of what happens to these people like 5 or 10 years down the line and their relationships and what happens to him being in this city.
Well, I have a lot more questions for our panelists, but I want to open this up as quickly as possible. We've got about 20 minutes left, and I know that some of us out here are just curious about these works or about the genre in general, about characters who shapeshift and move between worlds, about liminal spaces, about that state of unknowing which defines character and reader at times. So I would just love to go ahead, and if there are any questions, by all means, please raise your hand and we'll find somebody. Yes, please.
Yeah, my question is directed to PM. First of all, you know, this is great, this whole thing. We're from Montana, and it's, you know, it's kind of this city's a little mind-blowing, but 8 days, and, you know, it's 1 a.m., and people are like, oh, I'm done, and some of us is like, no, we're not done. But anyway, your character, the name you chose was King, and you know the word King obviously loaded with connotations, and so maybe riff a little bit about how you came to name the first name of your character King.
Yeah, actually, there was some thought put into that because as I wrote the story, he had a different name. But as I started to really flesh out what the plot was and what the characters' motivations are, what do these characters want, King felt like an appropriate name because he thinks he's a king. He behaves like he's a king, as you may have picked up when he was talking to the younger person, wanting to have respect through threats. But in the end, he was basically an emperor, with no clothes by the end of the story, thanks to his wife and his mother-in-law. He underestimated them gravely, and he got his comeuppance because of it. So I thought King was just sort of like a really appropriate name for someone who it's a falsehood, really.
Do you feel like it's somewhat place-specific, a nickname like that you might find that is somewhat in culture?
Yeah, I mean, speaking from my involvement in the Black culture as a person, my family, everybody has a nickname. Nicknames are very common. So even in this book, I think in terms of King, could be a nickname or it could be an actual name, because people do sometimes have actual names that are meant to bestow a certain type of personality upon the child. And we do that a lot in the African American community because a lot of times we don't have a lot of control over other things. And so that is used that way. But I kind of let people interpret how they like, because people have asked me, is that a nickname? And I'm like, well, what do you think? Because it could go either way.
Sometimes people here have like nicknames for their nicknames. I've noticed. It's amazing.
Great question. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So this is actually a question for everybody. It's like, have y'all ever read Mr. New Orleans?
You talking about Frenchy Broiliat?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
That's when I first learned about the whole mafia in Medlo.
Oh, okay.
The whole Skinner thing out there, and it's just a fascinating.
I might need this for research.
Pardon?
I might need this for research. I've heard of this book. Yeah, I've heard. I know. I have not read the book, but I've read some of the.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the name of the book. What was it again?
Mr. New Orleans.
Mr. New Orleans.
Oh, no, I have not. Mm-mm.
It opens a lot of doors to a lot of parts of New Orleans and Louisiana.
Yeah, there's a book called Gangs of New Orleans that kind of covers that as well. And in the story that I just read, I make mention of Carlos Marcello.
I dated a Marcello.
Really?
I dated Carlos's granddaughter.
Oh.
Yeah, I'd kind of just moved here and had absolutely no idea who she was. And people would be like, hey, I met some people in the family, and unfortunately the breakup was not terrible, obviously, because I'm still here, and we're still friends, but that was my adventure into that.
And there's only so much you can say about those years without putting yourself at risk of ending up in the bayou behind Moscas. But no, this is a very New Orleans thing to say. The pastor of my old church led Frenchy Broiliat's funeral procession. So absolutely he did. And so when you have all the elements of society colliding in one place, which is the street, right? What else defines New Orleans but our street culture? There you have all the pieces coming together. What a lovely inclusion of Mr. Broiliat. Any other questions here? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
I'm wondering about how New Orleans is changing itself over and over again. It seems like we cannot have vampires here before Anne Rice. So I'm wondering, what have you seen that is no longer here that we'll never get to see again?
K&B.
Oh, yeah.
This is something that I've noticed. I am a transplant. Go ahead and, exile me now. People don't like transplants here. But something I've noticed in my 14 years in New Orleans is that people love to talk about the good old days, right? I was like, well, it's not like it was in the 90s. I've read a lot of New Orleans writing of all different types, as a writer myself. And I was reading a column by Lafcadio Hearn, who was writing about New Orleans in the late 1800s. And you know what he says? He's like, well, y'all should have been here in like, y'all should have been here in like 1850. It was way better then. Like New Orleans has totally lost its charm. Like, this is all just fake, just so you all know. And I think that's just something we've been doing. That's like part of our whole shtick here is like, well, New Orleans isn't what it used to be. So that's just something I've noticed. It's funny. We've been doing that for a while.
Yeah. Say R.I.p.
Oh yeah, R.I.P.
Checkpoint
Checkpoint Charlie's.
Yeah, I moved here in the 90s, and everybody's like, oh, man, you should have been here in the 70s. One of the things I've noticed, I think especially since Katrina, is the emergence of the nolier than thou.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
like nobody hates somebody who moved here in 2020 like somebody who moved here in 2018.
Yep.
And I don't remember that from before Katrina. So that seems to be, you know, there's a lot more talk and argument over what's authentic and what's the real New Orleans. And, you know,
I don't think there's any such thing as the real New Orleans. I think
No.
we reinvent it literally constantly, and that's actually what's great about it. Is there is no real New Orleans.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I moved here from New England when I lived here twice. I lived here before Katrina and then after Katrina, and I wasn't here for Katrina. And I think it's interesting because it's so different, but at the same time, those conversations about belonging, like I remember those happening like when I lived here in the late 90s too, and they have like a different flavor now, or there's something different. But I think that sense of like, are you an insider or are you an outsider? And I say this all the time, so forgive me if people I know who have heard me say this, but I think this city's funny because like it's a city where you can move to and in 5 minutes you can feel like you're home because there's like cultural things that you can buy into. And like I grew up in a very Christian, very white, very small, very conservative like New England town. So I came here and I was like, I don't want to be anywhere else. But then you can live here for 40 or 50 years and never fit in and never feel like you fit in because there's so much like deeply like entrenched. And also like my wife's from here and her family feels like they don't fit in. You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, but whereas and that was one of the reasons I had the person, Charles, in this book he's from the Bay Area. And so he's sort of like commenting on gentrification as somebody who experienced that where he came from. That was something I tried to like engage with, like writing about it.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, if any of us were here in the mid 2010s, the citywide debate about gentrification, those are the true noir villains, you know, who all need to be strung up and shot. Any gentrifiers out there, you know, they're going to be first on the block. No, Bill, I wanted to ask you specifically about this exact question, which is we're all thinking about the question of reinvention and how do you write about a city which is itself constantly changing and will always constantly change. You have a time skip between book 5 and book 6, which you've mentioned for Maureen. So how do you handle the fact that in that 10-year gap between 5 and 6, New Orleans itself has changed, Maureen has changed, but how has the city changed, and how do you grapple with that as a novelist?
Maureen has changed a lot, and one of the things I did was she's no longer a cop. She became too frustrated with the job, and she quit. And as she says in the book, you couldn't help the people who needed help enough, and you couldn't hurt the people who needed to be hurt enough. And so she's decided to take things into her own hands. The city changes and the city doesn't. Poverty is a problem. Corruption is a problem. Racism is a problem. It's like there are certain things that are just embedded in the city. And so I think kind of, and I wish it changed more. I think maybe the way we come at these problems tries to change. We change leadership. We change, and a lot of what she deals with in the new book is also more personal. She becomes kind of a lawgiver for men who don't behave. So the new book is kind of more about that than systems and neighborhoods and stuff in New Orleans.
One quick question for PM. I mean, you spent many years here, and now you have moved out of state. I mean, did you find leaving the city, how did that affect the way that you wrote about the city? Do you see it more clearly from a distance now, or do you find that that you need to come back from time to time to get the sights and smells and sounds and so forth?
Well, because I still have family here, so yes, I do come back regardless of writing or whatnot. But I had this conversation with, I spent a lovely afternoon yesterday with my aunt and my cousin, and we just went all kind of different places. And we're talking about the corruption, and we're talking about, how the city, one of the things I think is that the city puts emphasis on things that don't make any sense. So I grew up here, went to college, went to Loyola University here. Didn't graduate from there because alcohol, but when I went there was a big
element,
deal
yeah.
when the drinking age changed to 21, and people, it was like an existential crisis where our tourism is going to go down, where we can't survive. And they were really willing to say, we'll give up all the highway money because we need to keep our drinking age 21. Obviously, nothing happened. But it's just the emphasis sometimes on fixing things that don't need fixing, and ignoring and not addressing things that do need to be fixed, like corruption and things like that. And I've been away for a while, but I keep coming back. But I also have family that's very, very entrenched here. There's a street, part of, I think it's Carrollton. One of those streets. Part of it is named after my uncle. When he passed away, all the news stations carried his funeral. My family's very entrenched here. I'm not in particular, so I can't go somewhere and use a name. But when I go somewhere with them, it's nice. But I guess for me, I don't feel like I feel very connected to the city. And I always have, and I think just because of my family ties, I always will. But I do have a certain amount of clarity looking inside, which also makes me very protective of the city. So even when I write, sometimes I have to really give up, this term that they use, kill your darlings. Sometimes I have to give up the idea of making New Orleans look really cool or really aesthetic in a way, because I still really love New Orleans. And so, in my stories, I do have to dig deeper and set it aside and come back to it in order to write that hard scene about the city being terrible, because I know sometimes the city is terrible.
Well, you get that familial attachment to it,
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, I can call my brother an
Yeah.
asshole, but if you call my brother an asshole, we're gonna fight.
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
And I feel a lot of people feel that way about the city.
Mm-hmm.
Ariadne, you look so pregnant with thought right now. You look like there's something that's just like right on the edge. Is there a spark here that's forming?
No, I'm not gonna go there. I'm not gonna go there. I was just thinking about the whole NOIR than thou thing, and how that has become more of a thing. You're not the first person I've heard say that. And I don't know if anyone knows the work of Rich Campanella, who's like kind of the preeminent historical geographer. I've gotten to know him over the last year. And he and I talk about the sort of like nativity thing quite a bit, and kind of about who has the right to write about New Orleans. And he has kind of a zinger. He likes to say that, let me see if I can get this right. Nativity is one of the nativity is the last socially acceptable form of birthright superiority. That people, and that this has sort of emerged in New Orleans culture, or maybe it's always been a part of New Orleans culture, that if you're born here, you are just like, you have this blanket permission to kind of claim a sort of superiority. And I know that's kind of that's a contentious thing to talk about, right? But I think that is something that factors into a lot of writing about New Orleans. It's like, who actually has permission to write about this place? Yeah.
Great question. We've got time for about one, maybe two more questions from the crowd. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So when it comes to publishing, did you guys look, national first for like agents and publishers, or did you feel like maybe they wouldn't get it and you looked more towards local publishers?
I went national. My career started with a couple of books set in a kind of a lost corner of New York. I don't know if that helped or not, but they were excited to have books about New Orleans. As John Goodman said, it's a city that lives in the world's imagination. So I don't think it's too hard to sell outside the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went with an indie publisher out of Pittsburgh who really loved the whole aesthetic of it, so it translates well outside of New Orleans.
I had, I think, an interesting path in that I queried an agent because she represented Laura Lippman and James Salas, both of whom are writers I love, and she gave me great notes on the book, which I basically rewrote. She's in my acknowledgments because I basically don't think I had actually written a real novel until I incorporated her notes, and I rewrote it from scratch. But then she passed on representing it, and then I ended up realizing, I was like walking down Frenchman Street one day, and I looked in the window of Frenchman Street Art and Books, and there were a bunch of like Crescent City Books publications in there, and I was like, that would be a good place to send this, so I sent it there. So kind of like, I was like, man, I'm just gonna keep knocking on doors. There wasn't that much, I guess, like strategy, but I agree. I think people outside the city this city lives in people's imaginations. Is that the quote from Gibbon? That's a really, it's like, I think people outside the city are absolutely fascinated with it in the best and worst ways, probably, but you know.
Ariadne, what was your route to publication?
Oh, I mean, I queried forever, and then I did the thing that every new novelist does. Yeah, I queried for like a year trying to get a literary agent, and then kind of gave up and started submitting to indie presses, and an indie press based in Nashville picked it up, and they focus on writing that's kind of centered in the South. So it worked out. Yep. And Ben, are you going to plug your book?
No, non-slam. I'm here to celebrate you guys. I love these
His
novels
book is
so
very
much.
good. He's a fantastic poet. Then I'll do it if you're not going to do it. Ben has a book of poetry called The Singing River, which is incredibly textural. It's very place-based. It's maybe not quite noir, but it is dark and it is beautiful. So I would encourage everyone to read it.
You're very kind.
It's fantastic.
We on the Gulf Coast, let me say this, we on the Gulf Coast, I think, are very privileged to live in a place which just bleeds stories from the soil, right? And I think that these four novelists here, fiction writers, are just attuned to what happens when you start listening for stories and you start going to places that you don't normally go for stories, or you pick up on a stray piece of dialogue that opens up a world to you of what somebody is going through or where they might be from. And I'm just so grateful to live and to work and to write in a place where such talent is on offer, because I mean, the Gulf Coast is coming back, and I'm super excited to see what is emerging out of it. I think we have time for one more quick question before we get everybody to go buy some books and sign the books. Yes, ma'am, right here.
So I'm curious about how something real that has happened gets incorporated into fiction. For each of you, it's slightly different not slightly, but very different with each of your approaches.
I mean, you can lean on things that really happen because it's kind of really hard to outstory New Orleans and like come up with something more interesting than what actually happened. But like in the Devil's Muse, it's set during 4 hours of the Muses Parade, and there's which happens every year, and which I did. You know, I went up and I watched the parade and I watched the police and I watched tried to watch it from an outsider's perspective. And while the parade's going on, there's a shooting just off the parade route. And so the police have to scramble, and how do you stop this from escalating? That happens, unfortunately, almost every year. You know, it wasn't based on an actual shooting, but I read about what happened, and so you kind of, you can use, I think especially in fiction, you use something that happened as a launching point, and then it just gets changed and reinterpreted, and you never let the truth get in the way of a good story, so you change and leave out what you need to make your story work the way you want.
My advice is be careful, because I give ghost tours. I wrote a book about ghost tours. A lot of the characters in the book are pretty directly inspired by real people. And when I wrote this, I'm not actually thinking about the fact that it's going to be published and people are going to read it. And some of those people have never talked to me again. I changed the names, but yeah, it wasn't enough. So yeah, be careful. That's my advice.
I do that with places too. If something bad happens in a real place, I change the name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I think the story will kind of tell you too. I think that and I do this a lot where like you take like life models, you know, but then they'll be like, and I think a lot of the process of me really figuring out like what this book was having to ask myself, well, why does this person do this? And why does this person, and so maybe I'd like grafted a little bit of this person I used to know in San Francisco onto somebody I met here to make this sort of like composite sketch of the character. But then I was like, I have to ask myself about those motives. I will say as an aside, when I moved here, I was staying at the YMCA on Lee Circle in like 1997 looking for a place to live, and that was when I read Confederacy of Dunces, and I was like, this book would seem so surreal to me if I walked past Ignatius Reilly like 3 or 4 times a night walking around the corner, and I was like, actually, this is just realism. This isn't even like strange. Anyway, PM, do you have anything? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just getting into what you were saying. But no, I do feel like this area has so much rich history, and so my collection starts with a story that's in Reconstruction, Louisiana. So I'm able to talk about what that looks like from the perspective of a character who is a les gens du couleur libre, which is a free person of color, and she thinks she's free, but she finds out very quickly that her status is meaningless. And that is really what happened back then. Once the military pulled out and Jim Crow was brutally initiated in, free people of color suddenly lost all the rights that they had before. And so that's not a stretch to write that into a book that actually happened. And it's, I mean, still kind of happening, how people's rights can be stripped from them. So New Orleans is so rich with historic context. How can you? It's almost like, how can you not write about it? Because then it feels like you're not writing. You're writing a false story. It's like writing about New York and not writing, in New York City and not writing about, if it's set in the 70s. Those were some crazy times in New York in the 70s. If you don't actually talk about that, it just feels like it doesn't make sense.
The past has shadows, the present has shadows, the hours ahead of us, they have shadows too. I cannot think of a better place or question on which to end.
Can
end
I
our
ask if
conversation.
folks are on any other panels or doing any other readings for the rest of the festival?
No, but I want to know if everybody's book is in the bookshop and
just
you're
a
all
Mine is,
following me
yeah.
there
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
can get them signed.
So the
I wanna-
first
yes.
3 books here, Tom's book, Bill's books, Devil's Muse, and Ash Tuesday, Ariadne's book, those are all next door in the bookshop. PM, please tell us where we can pre-order your collection.
Yes, so if you go to pmraymond.com, on the front page is links to Amazon and to the publisher for the print and for the ebook versions, and that comes out April 21st.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists, to our sponsors, to the festival.
And our wonderful moderator.
Thank you, Ben.
Total
Yes.
joy.
Well done.
You guys have a
Thank you,
great
Ben.
afternoon.